Ogg knelt with his Bullgryns in the front of the Terminator line, their slab shields interlocking. Before him the screeches and guttural roars of the approaching Tyranid swarm grew louder and louder. Gallus stood in the middle of the two lines. His head was just about even with the kneeling Ogryn. He held his bolt pistol and chainsword at the ready. The Death Watch Marine had taken a sniper's position. With the huge vaulted ceilings, he climbed the side of the stone effortlessly, and found a suitable spot atop an old broken pillar. Inquisitor Torix and his retinue of Tempestus scions and his lone tech priest stood in the back while Sergeant Lazarus and the Lamenters readied their weapons. A flood of Tyranids seemed to cascade around the corner into the hallway. The sheer number of them was impossible to count. They clung to the walls and to the ceiling. They were so densely packed it was difficult to tell the difference between bioforms. Just claws, teeth, scything limbs, and cruel bioweapons. A volley of fire erupted from the disgusting swarm and impacted against the Ogryn slab shields.
Hold! Wait until they are closer! Make each round count, brothers!
As if in response, a lone shot was fired by the Death Watch Marine, catching a Tyranid warrior right between the eyes as it emerged from the swarm for just a fraction of a moment. The bioform tumbled back and was immediately swallowed by the swarm. Ogg's muscles tensed, and he grinned and waited to be able to smash the bad bugs, though he was mad that a bunch of them were cheating and climbing on the walls and ceiling. More blasts from the bioweapons that struck the slab shields. A few struck the helmets of the Terminators, but glanced harmlessly off their thick armor. Lazarus narrowed his eyes.
Fire!
Ogg felt like the entire Imperial Guard was behind him, firing every weapon imaginable. Bolter rounds filled Ogg's field of vision. It was difficult to even see what was happening, but the Ogryn bonehead could feel bits of Tyranid hitting off his armor as they fell from the ceiling. He braced for the impact he knew would come. The bad bugs slammed against his shield. But nothing came. Huge plumes of burning promethium filled the hallway, and the Tyranids continued to press in. But for the moment, they were kept at range. The Ogryns and the melee Terminators were getting impatient for their chance to spill the foul ichor of the Xenos. Ogg thought that the Marines were going to have all the fun. But that was when he saw three enormous shapes emerge from the horde of Tyranids. Massive conifexes lumbered in the hail of bolter fire, their thick, chitinous armor absorbing incredible punishment. They roared and charged the lines. With impossible precision, the Death Watch Marine pulled his trigger twice, and two neat holes appeared where the conifex's eyes had been. The creature seemed dazed, but then charged forward blindly into the Ogryn line. Ogg was ready. The conifex swiped its claws too early and missed the shield wall completely. The bonehead swung his power maul and connected with the powerful limbs, crushing it and snapping them in two. The blind conifex was much easier to deal with. It was seriously wounded, and the other Ogryns moved in to dispatch it, crushing its skull. The other conifexes were much more able to act as line breakers, crashing into the Ogryns. One Bullgryn by the name of Charlie saw the creature stab right through his shield and into his arm. These creatures were able to rip tanks apart with their claws. Even the thick armor of the Imperial forces were not immune to the heavy hitting power of the conifexes. The creature pulled Charlie off his feet and flung him back into the swarm, where he vanished into the pile of Xenos. Ogg saw Charlie's fists punching the little ones as best he could, but it wasn't long before he could see nothing at all. Once the initial impact from the Fexes was absorbed, the Bullgryns with their mighty power weapons began to crack the shells of these creatures. The Lamenter Terminators pushed forward as well, bringing their lightning claws to bear. Just as the Conifex could pierce through thick armor, so could the power weapons of the Imperial defenders. The Tyranids flailed and knocked over a few Ogryns from their feet, but they were beaten and slashed to pieces in quick order as the melee ensued. The backline began to focus on the bioforms that were creeping above. Inquisitor Torix was picking out large targets of value and making liberal use of his melta pistol to turn the powerful bioforms into ashen carbon. The melee was a blur. Ogg smashed and bashed every bad bug he could find. The fight seemed to drag on for an eternity. Many of the Ogryns were injured in the fighting. A few more died trying to push back the seemingly endless tide of bugs. Doug, Seth, Butch, they had all gone to the Emperor's house. Ogg hoped they would be good company for Fletcher and Biff. Ogg himself had already sustained a pretty good beating. The corner of his slab shield had been hacked off, acid had eaten through his armor on his flesh arm and given him a good burn. But the pain was good. It helped Ogg stay angry. Gallus was probably the smallest target. He kept shouting his orders, and the Tyranids seemed to lose him in the forest of Ogryns and Terminators. Gallus would emerge with a hail of bolter rounds and a swift chain blade to the torso of whatever horror menaced him. New diabolical bioforms would emerge to come to the front and try to break the lines. Different shapes, different sizes, all bugs, all bad, all smashed. In all the fighting, only one of the Terminators died. Ogg saw a flash of blue light, and he thought he heard Sergeant Lazarus shout, "Diomedes!" The Ogryn looked over to see a Terminator with only one arm slashing through several gaunts before a second blast of bioplasm struck him in the chest. As the fighting continued, Ogg felt something funny in his head, an odd kind of pressure. He could hear ringing in his ears, and blood began to drip from his nose. The air seemed to press in and expand, almost like someone was breathing. Like the walls of the hallway were expanding and compressing like enormous lungs. The feeling seemed to shatter as a powerful psychic blast tore through two of the Ogryn, flinging them like rag dolls into the air. The blast seemed to be absorbed by one of the Terminators. It seemed to stagger the Lamenter, but he did not give up. The Crux Terminatus, the shard of the Emperor's armor that empowered each suit of Terminator armor, seemed to blunt the impact of the psychic blast.
"Damn! Zoanthropes! And something else! Get the Ogryns out from the front! We must withdraw! We need Sister Commander Abatisa!"
Behind the lines of Tyranids, great coiled worms floated above the swarm below them, crackling with psychic energy. And in the center of these creatures was something else. Something big, with a large, humped back lined with spines running down its center.
"Ogryns! Behind the Terminators! Fighting retreat!"
Ogg and Gallus began directing the Ogryns to leave the front line, fighting to the Terminators. Ogg was having to physically haul some of the more enthusiastic brawlers behind the lines. Between the Bonehead and his commissar, they were able to pull the Ogryns back, much to their displeasure. One of the Zoanthropes' heads exploded as the Death Watch Marine grinned and put another bolt round into the chamber. Before he could pull the trigger again, the Zoanthropes fired psychic blasts at the pillar he had positioned himself on top of. The Marine rolled clear in time and gripped the pillar with his feet and free hand as he slid down the pillar, sparks shooting from the ceramite as it scraped against stone. The line was moving back towards the Sanctum Porta. They could withstand the might of the Tyranid swarm for quite some time, but they could not hold off these psychic blasts like that. The Inquisitor Torix began running with his retinue to call for assistance. As he ran, lithe shapes dropped from the ceilings, and two of the Tempestus Scions fell immediately as they were impaled by the lightning-fast lictors. Before they took one step, the other Scions opened fire and obliterated the Xenos. More fell among the retinue. Another Scion was speared, and Torix himself felt his personal shield crackle with energy as another lictor fell on top of him, threatening to pin him. Torix managed to get his Inferno pistol free and fired a melt-a-blast at point-blank range into the lictor. The thing was incinerated, and the Inquisitor could feel the wave of heat wash over him. He quickly got to his feet. He could see more shapes scrambling on the ceiling. The Scions began firing upwards, dispatching the deadly assassins as quickly as they could. Torek slipped away and continued towards Shield Captain Actaeon and Sister Commander Abatisa. The line continued its retreat. The Lamenters remain engaged with the swarm to prevent the zoanthropes from firing into friendly units. But this did not dissuade them. The deaths of the Lamenters were more important than the lives of a few dozen nearly infinitely replaceable bioforms. The blasts would stagger the Terminators, knock them off their feet, and then it would be the Ogryns who would surge forward, eager to bash more of the bad bugs as the Lamenters regained their footing. But with no psychic defense, the Bullgryns would be blasted apart by the unyielding will of the hive mind. A few of the zoanthropes were killed by bolter fire, sometimes overwhelming their psychic defensive barriers and causing their heads to rupture. But the swarm seemed to have unlimited resources. They were so close to the Sanctum Porta now. Ogg brought his power maul down on the head of a particularly nasty-looking warrior, as a lamenter by the name of Asteropaeus was blasted backwards by the zoanthropes. As the bonehead looked up, he could see the creature charging up to unleash another psychic bolt. The eldritch energy streaked towards Ogg as he braced for impact. But the blow never came. It seemed to dissipate right before his eyes. Ogg turned to see that they had reached the narrow doorway leading into the place where the special thing was being kept. And there he saw the big, shiny man and the small, quiet woman. Ogg could feel his spirit rising as the Emperor's special helpers emerged to help fight the bad bugs. But this feeling was tempered by the low-level anxiety that seemed to follow the dangerous-looking Sister Commander Abatisa wherever she went. With the remaining Ogryns and Terminators protected from the blasts of psychic energy, everyone formed a line around the door. This protective bubble surrounding them, the fighting became fierce as the Tyranids desperately threw everything they had at the defenders. The big one in the back slowly began to move forward. It almost seemed like it crawled and slithered through the ranks of the other bioforms. Ogg was exhausted. One of the Tyranids charged him and mashed its armored frill into his face, cracking the mask on his helmet and bashing through to his mouth. The bonehead spat out a tooth and responded with a headbutt of his own, crushing the bioform and caving its skull in. With his muscles aching, the knuckles on his good hands scraped and bleeding, his augmetic limbs were battered and scratched with wear, Ogg saw the shield captain and the Sister of Silence leap into battle. The Ogryn had never seen anything move as fast as these two. The Tyranids seemed like they were moving in slow motion as halberd and greatsword sliced through the endless stream of enemies. But the massive shape among the sea of hungry flesh continued to move forward. The Tyranids seemed to realize that the Sister of Silence was the source of the null shield surrounding the defenders. A blistering hail of biofire rained down on the shrinking Imperial forces, trying to target the nimble warrior. The Bullgryns had moved back to the front and locked their shields again. Many of the shields were already battered and damaged, and several of the slab shields were shattered and blown apart in the onslaught. Ogg couldn't see what happened to those Bullgryn afterwards. Even with the heavy armor, the Bullgryns and the Terminators were slowly being worn down by the endless barrage. The Custodes and the Sister of Silence looked untouched by the battle, weaving in and out of the enemy formations, leaving only death in their wake. But that was when it came. Rising out of the swarm, it came. It was gnarled and battered and bore many old scars and wounds. Ogg recognized it, and he could see the scars where the 3 lances had wounded it in the chest. He remembered the shiny men had come to save them before. This was the one who killed Biff. The hive tyrant emerged from its lesser brethren and seemed to fill the entire high arch and hallway. At its feet, tyrant guards gathered. The great creature hissed. Shield Captain Actaeon waved back to Sister Abatisa.
We can't risk you! Move back into the sanctum! If you die, there's no seal on that portal!
The sister commander adamantly shook her head and raised her sword to defend herself against the great monster and its hulking retinue. Inquisitor Torix drew his power sword as Lazarus, Ogg, Gallus, Actaeon, and the Death Watch Marines stood against the horror. The fight began and everything was a blur. Ogg had barely taken a step forward when one of the great blades of the beast slashed him ferociously across the chest, racing through his armor and biting deeply into his skin. He grunted and fell to one knee, using what was left of his slab shield to hold himself up. The tyrant god was on him in a moment, and Ogg was back on his heels, dealing with these bruising, heavy creatures. The hive tyrant kept slithering from one opponent to the next, throwing in a slash here and there, whipping his great tail around to trip or bash one of his opponents. It was like a game of chess played in milliseconds. Occupy all of the enemies, and single out his true target. Abatisa. The nimble Sister of Silence dodged this way and that, evading, parrying, every blade, every moment. But the floor was slick with blood and ichor. To Ogg's eye, there was no slip, not even a hesitation. But the tiniest moment where she was off balance, it struck. Inquisitor Torix leapt to her defense. Wily and extremely well equipped the Inquisitor was, but he still was only a man. He parried the first strike, but the next three saw the blades of the hive tyrant painted with the Inquisitor's blood. Inquisitor Torix fell. Ogg roared and went into a berserk rage. He slammed his shield into the tyrant god next to him and began relentlessly beating against it with his power maul. Shield Captain Actaeon was wading through enemies trying to reach Abatisa, but for those moments she stood alone. In Ogg's rage, things seemed to slow down. He was suddenly very aware of his surroundings. He saw out of the corner of his eye the special thing through the doorway. It looked like a big circle of swirling light and color, colors that Ogg had never seen before. He couldn't let the bad bugs get to that special thing no matter what. He had to get to the quiet lady, but he felt like he was moving in slow motion. He had to get there before it was too late. Abatisa dodged one blade, parried another, slashed at a third limb, severing it. She dodged a blade coming at her from one of the tyrant's gods that moved on her and ducked just below its strike. But in that moment Ogg saw the great blade of the beast slam down on her, and the Sister of Silence was pierced through her chest. Abatisa grimaced and stabbed forward into the gut of the creature that had skewered her. The next moment saw the tyrant pull Abatisa apart. Ogg roared and charged forward. He recklessly threw his power maul and struck the creature's chitinous hide, cracking it deeply and causing ichor to burst from its wound. But Ogg didn't see the strike. But there was an impact on his slab shield that sent him sprawling. His augmetic arm shattered. All around him, the other Bulgrins and the Lamenters desperately fought to keep the flood back, but it just seemed like it would not end. As Ogg landed, he grunted and turned his head to the side. He could see the shiny special thing again. As Ogg struggled to get his feet, the circle began to glow brightly. Shield Captain Actaeon's shoulders sagged, and for a moment the dauntless Shield Captain, handcrafted by the Emperor himself, looked defeated. He quickly rallied himself.
Brothers, whatever warp spawn comes out of that portal, we will stand and we will die fighting.
For the Emperor! Suddenly, there was a blinding flash from the portal. The simple Ogryn bonehead couldn't make any sense of what he was seeing. Ogg shielded his eyes as a great figure came into view. It bore the wings of an angel, and it seemed to hover in front of the portal for a moment. before hurtling towards the melee. It burned with a relentless fire. Ogg wasn't sure what was going on, but he felt his body reinvigorated. He leapt to his feet, picked up his power maul with his good arm from his fallen Ogryns, and followed this mysterious winged being. Its voice echoed through the halls and fired the hearts of the remaining defenders.
Rise, my sons. Rise up and drive back the nightmare. You are not forgotten. The Emperor has not forgotten you. And I have not forgotten you.
Sergeant Lazarus stood and regarded the figure with awe.
Father! Father, do you live? Are we forgiven?
The golden shining figure only smiled before drawing its mighty flaming sword to lead the great charge. Ogg wasn't sure what happened after that. He remembered standing. He remembered feeling like all of his tired had gone away. He remembered running and swinging his power maul. He remembered crushing the bad bugs. He did not know how long he ran. He did not know how long they fought. The next thing he remembered, he was lying face first on the cold floor. He ached all over and had dried blood on his face and chest. Commissar Gallus was there, along with Lazarus, Actaeon, and a handful of other lamenters and Ogryns. Of the original 20, there were maybe 7, if Ogg could count that high. Gallus collapsed against the wall, caked with blood, and Ichor as well. "Did we win?" The Commissar looked down the hallway strewn with the corpses of the Tyranids. Many had been seared to charcoal by the holy light of the angel. Gallus slowly nodded his head. "Yes, Ogg. By the Emperor's grace, I think we've won. I think it's over." Good. 'Cause I'm really hungry. No man do they call me. My mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Thank you all very much for watching the last episode of Ogg the Ogryn. For those of you who are Ogg lovers, I am planning on making another series featuring this lovable Ogryn. But I want to rest my brain for a little bit and let my Ogryn creativity juices replenish a little bit before I start the next series. If you enjoyed this series, please like and comment. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. And if you have no idea what's going on, well, you picked a heck of an episode to start watching. But there's a link to the Ogg playlist if you would like to start from the beginning. If you would like to support me after this long journey, you're welcome to join me on Patreon for ad-free content, or you can also donate via PayPal if you prefer. Thank you all so much for your love. This has been a long, fun journey, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. No Man out.